Hello, everyone. Welcome to Health 180 with Carrie and Fan and Rogers TV and podcast. It's October 7, 2021. My name is Carrie and Fan, and this is part 2 of our 2-part special, Recognizing Mental Health Day, focusing on consent and capacity. We want to help you learn more, so let's learn together. I'm joined by Dr. Amanda Abate and Anika Dainty. Welcome, everyone. Glad you can join us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anika, tell us about yourself and what you do at Cmaj Durham.
So I am a peer support specialist for Cmaj Durham. I've been working there for a year, but I've actually been involved with Cmaj Durham for over 10 years. I actually was a client. I started as a client in 2010 there. I have bipolar affective disorder 1. And at the time I was struggling with some health issues, of course, and I connected with Cmaj, and fast forward 11 years, I now work for them as a peer support specialist for their assertive community treatment team, which deals with people with severe mental illness in regards to care.
The power of patients to make a change in their experience, through their experiences. Dr. Abate, why is it important for you to ensure that a person's integrity and respect is maintained if you feel that a person does have a mental capacity?
So I think, above all else, you said the power of patience, which is so true. And I think we need to acknowledge that everyone, no matter what they're going through, whether it's a mental illness, a physical illness, they're doing well, no matter what, is a human and deserves respect and integrity, like you said. And at the same time, especially in mental health, there are a lot of times where we have to intervene in a way that takes away the rights of our patients at times, which can be incredibly difficult, like we talked about last time with patients. The idea of being told that they have to stay in hospital even though they don't want to, or we have concerns about their ability for decision-making can be incredibly distressing, as it would be to anyone. And so at the end of the day, the most important thing is being human, providing respect, trying to find common ground, and ultimately keeping your goal on keeping someone functioning and achieving what they can achieve in their life. So it's really important to always remember that, we all deserve respect and integrity. And even if someone is going through a difficult time and you're having to consider, other people to make their decisions or having them stay in hospital when they aren't choosing to, that you try and find common ground and a way to remind them that your focus is their best interest.
We have various individuals in various fields and expertise, but empathy is so crucial in anything that you do. Do you have any personal experience that gives you that empathy to understand patient or anyone living with an ailment?
Yeah, certainly, on a personal level, I'm someone that has anxiety and, not a word that I would, as a psychiatrist, throw around lightly. There is a clinical definition of it. And so I know what it's like to have, ruminative thoughts, repetitive thoughts that come into my mind, worrying about things maybe more than I need to. And then, in my family, I have family members that have anxiety. I've had family members have, accidents that have happened that have affected kind of the course of their life. And so certainly I come from a place of knowing what that's like. The other thing, though, that's important with empathy, though, is realizing that you can imagine what it's like to be in someone's shoes, but when they're on that end, the feeling is that no one understands, and also respecting that that's how they feel as well. And so knowing that as much as you're trying their best, there can be a feeling at times that no one will understand, and understanding that feeling as well can be really important.
Yeah, very important. Anika, what is your diagnosis? You mentioned your diagnosis before. I just want you to elaborate a little bit about that and tell us what it's like to live with a mental health diagnosis.
So my actual diagnosis is bipolar affective disorder 1. I was diagnosed at the age of 24. When I had my first manic episode. I've had about 7 episodes over the last 14 years. And I've spent about 1.5 years of my life in psychiatric institutions. So it's challenging having a mental health diagnosis. We talk to the doctor about consent and capacity. And you're essentially, when you're having a manic episode, you are incapacitated. And
before we get into that, I just want to find out, like, did you lose your capacity?
I did. At 24, I had a breakdown, a psychosis, and I lost my capacity. My parents had to come get me from my college campus and take me to a hospital in the GTA. And I was in there for about 3 weeks, unwell.
You said you were in college. Were there a lot of pressure you were feeling from going through college?
Yeah, I was at Carleton University in Ottawa, so I was away from my family. I had already been diagnosed with depression and anxiety at 17. So usually during the winter months, I get low mood. So I wasn't doing my work. I was stressed out over school. There was relationships that were happening. And so that all, and then on top of it, in my fourth and final year, my grandmother passed away, someone very close to me. And that was the trigger that started it all. So.
And, you know, for now, I know for college, I'm not sure how it works in university, but I know that they have to provide the accommodation that students need. It might even be that you're going to class and all of a sudden you can't go. You're allowed to walk away from class because of your disability. So, and there's certain things that are put in place like tutoring and various different components that are available through college that I'm aware of that could help students. A lot of pressure going through college. I want to ask you this because I've seen this myself being an individual in the Black community. And being someone who has a foundation who covers mental health as well. How did your family cope or handle your diagnosis?
My mom is a very religious woman, so she thought she could pray the cray away, as I say. So she thought the power of prayer would help me and heal me. And she's also, ironically, a nurse of 37 years. So there was that struggle between, religion and science where she thought prayer was the most important thing. And I was struggling with understanding my diagnosis. And I felt completely unsupported by my family members because I'm Guyanese. I come from a West Indian family. So, anyone who has mental illness, it's not discussed in our community, as you well know. It's very hidden. So I was struggling to understand my illness. My parents weren't even trying to understand my illness. They were struggling to hide it from the whole family. And a lot of things occurred as a result of that. So
yes, Dr. Abate, I want to hear from you in regards to that spiritual aspect and what would you say to someone who's going through it? Because often if we all tend to have different spirituality, we tend to pray. And then, as someone who's going through an ailment and, it's seeming like that prayer isn't working, what would you suggest to someone who actually continuously pray to have, to be better?
So, the first thing is having a belief system, whatever it is so important. And at the end of the day, we're not looking in, I'm very much aware I'm a cisgender white woman working in the Western healthcare model. And so there's the immediate belief that my perspective is one. And I understand that I will naturally have an inherent bias the way anyone will. At the same time, it's important to acknowledge that there are so many ways to come to a position of healing. And a lot of things can be incorporated. My question always comes down to, is it working? Is it not? Or is there something else that we can do? So I think prayer is absolutely, if that's part of your healing process or one's healing process, that's fantastic. Maybe part of the way that, a higher power brings support is by the, physical things we have available on this earth, like lithium, like other medications that are here. And that's the way to go forward from that. And the other thing is, I never want to negate someone else's way of healing, but I want to say, hey, there's this other thing that can be helpful. And I'm wondering if you can come and see it from my perspective as well. And I can provide you information about the risks, benefits, what I expect to happen with treatment so that hopefully this can help a loved one or a person get better with that treatment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Onika, how did you feel knowing that you can take control of your own mental health? And how has that changed your perspective on life?
So about 5 years ago, I had my own assertive community treatment team, my post outpatient care. And my social worker said to me point blank that my mental health was in my hands, and he would support me, but I would have to take the lead. And that was the first time in so many years that I'd ever heard that I was in control. I was always being led to that point, led to the hospital, led to the, emergency, just led by whoever was leading me. And I wasn't taking the lead myself. So when I was empowered to start doing that, that's when my healing journey really began. I did a lot of self-discovery. I practiced a lot of self-care. And I built my self-care toolbox in that time. And one of the biggest things I think for me was that he recommended was starting a mental health advanced directive. So Dr. Abate, can you tell us about what a mental health directive is?
So Onika might actually be able to tell me more, because I've yet to see, I would say, I think it's a great thing to have affairs in order ahead of time. Yes. I haven't actually seen one provided when I've had a client come into hospital. So we typically see the power of attorney documents. That's not uncommon to see. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the mental health advanced directive, and Onika, please correct me if I'm incorrect, it's an idea of in a state of wellness, coming up with expectations and plans and what you would like to see in terms of care and what your wishes are, so that they are maintained during treatment if one becomes unwell. Would you agree with that, Onika?
That is absolutely correct, doctor. That is exactly what a mental health advanced directive is. You can put various things in there, like your family doctor and your psychiatry, psychology information, your medical, your medication history, as well as what you look like when you become unwell and what questions that you can ask that person. Either, how much sleep have you had? For me, it's things like doing 50 tasks, trying to do 50 tasks in a day and only getting like 3 done. So I'd say, look at my agenda. What's it look like? Or, is my space, my office space or my room space messy? So it's like, it's letting people know prior to you being hospitalized, what to look for, the signs to look for, and who to call when that happens. You assign a medical proxy.
Let me ask you, I just want to find out before we go, Onika, do you always have your capacity? Is there a process
no,
you have in place?
I don't.
How does it work? You can briefly tell us.
The way my mania works, it's almost like a seasonal thing. It usually hits me after there's some kind of a stressor. I will become unwell within 2 months. I'll end up in severe psychosis. Then I'll be hospitalized for about 6 to 8 weeks after that to come down off of the manic psychosis. During that time, I'm incapacitated. I have no sense of myself or how to take care of my well-being. And there's been so many times in the past that unfortunately, because of the feelings I had towards family members or, just again, not knowing, not being educated on my own illness, that I was left without help or assistance from family members until I was well into the hospital system. That's when I was able to give consent, but I didn't give it before.
Yeah, and that's so important to get your perspective, and thank you so much. That's all the time we have for Health 180 with Carrie Finn and Rogers TV and podcast. We'll be right back.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
When you're online, Rogers TV on YouTube shares news and events from your community, like messages from local leaders, updates on the latest health news, local business presenting their new offerings, and how our local communities are working their way through these unprecedented times. Visit and subscribe to Rogers TV on YouTube for the latest local information.
This is Rogers TV.
Welcome back to Health 180 with Carrie and Fenn on Rogers TV and podcast. My name is Carrie and Fenn. We are exploring consent and capacity with a panel of experts, psychiatrists Amanda Abate, and lawyers Charlena Claxon and Andrew Felker are with me. I'm glad you guys can join me back for this segment. Charlena, tell us about yourself and the work that you do.
Hi, yes, thank you for having me on the show. In terms of the work that I do, I'm a defense lawyer. I have two areas of practice that I find myself involved in most. One is as a criminal defense lawyer, and a vast majority of my clients may have symptoms or display symptoms of a mental health illness. And the other aspect is in the Civil Consent and Capacity Board area, where I represent persons that either have are being challenged in terms of their capacity to consent to treatment or to their finances, or are determining whether or not they should remain as an involuntary person in a psychiatric facility.
So why did you get into this field?
You know, it's always been a passion of mine, and I find that having the skills as a lawyer, as well as being able to advocate on, you know, the most vulnerable of our population at the most vulnerable times of their life, it really did speak to me when I started to engage in these areas of law, and it just kept on going.
You know, I spoke to Dr. Abate in regards to empathy. What role do you think empathy play in what you do as a lawyer in those areas?
I think anybody that practices, whether on the medical side, the legal side, the judicial side, or even staff that work alongside those individuals, really have to have a strong sense of empathy, sympathy as well, you know, just compassion, no matter which side you're on, because you're either looking at the compassion of the patient or the accused person before you, the compassion of victims or of an incident, the family members that are involved. It really is one that those traits should be encompassed across the board.
Yes, so important. Andrew, tell us about the process with the bank if someone is incapable, and does the bank have the right to investigate someone trying to use the power of attorney they're responsible for?
That's a great question, Carrie, because it's no set answer for it. In theory, the bank should accept a power of attorney document that's presented to them. But the banks are aware that fraud is kind of rampant out there. And so it's not unusual for a bank to call me. If I did the power of attorney, if I prepared it, it's not unusual for the bank to call and say, hey, can we send over what's being presented to us and have you verified that that's your signature on it? And I think that's a great thing for the banks to be doing. It doesn't really slow things down a whole lot. But beyond that, if they're presented with one, I'll call it a homemade power of attorney, or one that you can print off the internet, the bank will sometimes be suspicious of that. It's especially when it's done without the assistance of a lawyer. It's done in someone's home, and a neighbor or two or a family member are the witnesses to it. The bank may be suspicious of the document. They may think that some sort of undue influence or pressure was put on, or perhaps the person who signed it doesn't have capacity. So in those cases, the bank will question. It's really the frontline worker at the bank that's going to be doing that. They're going to hopefully know their client and know if there's some red flags, at which point they will send it to their legal department, and there'll probably be some questions asked. The general answer is no, but in the right circumstances, I find the bank does question.
So if there isn't a power of attorney in place and someone is incapable, would the public guardian trustee then be involved? How does that work?
That's the automatic. So if there is no power of attorney in place, the public guardian is by law obligated or mandated to become the person's guardian of the property, and they will take over. So sometimes it happens in an involuntary setting. If they're in a psychiatric facility, specifically, there's an assessment that the treating psychiatrist will do, which will trigger it. But again, if they trigger it and the public guardian looks and finds out there's a power of attorney, they back off. They don't want to be involved if there is a power of attorney. But where there is not one, that's what the law is. The public guardian will do it. There's a process to replace the public guardian, and it's a time and a cost to doing it. So the default is family members can come along to replace them to become what's called the guardian of the property.
Okay. So I'm interested to find out this. How do you pay the bills for a loved one who does not have capacity?
With some difficulty. It's not difficult, Carrie-Ann, if they have a power of attorney. So again, I think I said this the last time, the key is to planning ahead of time and having that power of attorney document in place. If you've got the power of attorney document, the loved one who's ill now, not capable, the person who has the power of attorney takes that into the bank, says, here's the power of attorney. The bank recognizes that it's a valid power of attorney. They, in essence, just put you on as the signatory to the account, and the power of attorney simply signs the check, Carrie-Ann Fenn, PA, power of attorney, and it's all good. Yes. If there is no power of attorney, the bills have to get sent to the public guardian, who opens the file, has a caseworker, and they pay the bills from downtown Toronto.
Okay. Charlena, if a motion is put forward about a person's capacity, should the court engage in that person in legal proceedings without putting a process in place to determine if a person has capacity or not in a legal proceedings?
So in terms of the areas of law that I focus on, in front of the Consent and Capacity Board hearings, what happens is a psychiatrist will bring an application indicating that the person either is incapable of consenting to their treatment or incapable of managing their finances. And then there is a tribunal and a board that would actually decide on whether or not, on a balance of probabilities, the psychiatrist's findings should be upheld. So when we're looking at capacity in the Consent and Capacity Board error, then it does not necessarily go before a judge at first instance. It goes before the tribunal and can be appealed to a judge. Closer to Mr. Felker's point, that is in the civil context outside of the Consent and Capacity Board error, and that can be brought before a judge.
Dr. Abate, who should handle consent and capacity of a patient in your opinion overall?
So I think our system is a good system thus far. I think there are appropriate checks and balances. So like Onika mentioned in the previous segment, people can have fluctuating capacity. And so it's the responsibility of the psychiatrist when someone's suffering from a mental health crisis to reassess capacity regularly, to assess whether someone is incapable and whether the capacity has been regained, say, during treatment and improvement in their mental status. And so I do think the system is set up well in that, a psychiatrist is making the determination. The patient has an opportunity to go to a rights advisor or will be seen by a rights advisor as indicated by law, and has the option of saying to the rights advisor whether they want to contest or not. And then going to the tribunal that Ms. Claxton talked about. I think we've gone there together sometimes, and have that hearing to determine whether the finding should be upheld, and then using the hierarchy of substitute decision makers or a power of attorney if in place when it comes to capacity. Now, actually, there is one thing I would say about that. Just like Mr. Felker said, it's best to get your affairs in order ahead of time, because the substitute decision maker hierarchy is really set in stone based on one's biological relationship at first in terms of their connection to a person. Someone may not want their parent to be the one making their decisions, and it's best to determine that ahead of time and have that in a written document so that if you don't want them to follow the hierarchy, that is known ahead of time.
Andrew, what's your thoughts on the court handling consent and capacity?
Well, again, to go back to what Charlena said, I deal with it in the civil matter. And so you're asking a judge to decide who the person's going to be appointed as the guardian. Generally, though, that's been done upon a review by the public guardian and trustee, you have to do it on notice to them. And usually the courts will go along with what's being proposed. What's being proposed will always have a plan. For money, it's called a management plan. For personal care, it's called a guardianship plan. That's been vetted by the public guardian. It's been vetted by the family members because the requirement is that you serve all the close family members with this application. So a judge, more often than not, just goes along with it, says, everyone who's a stakeholder here has had input, has had say. And very rarely will a judge go against that. Now, if it's a contested one, you're asking the judge to have the wisdom of Solomon to decide between these competing interests. And then, who else are you going to have do it? I mean, I think that's why we have judges. That's why they have the red sash, and they get to make that very difficult decision.
But should the consent and capacity board weigh in?
Well, in the civil context, you're asking to have somebody appointed to be the guardian. Now, does the consent and capacity board, I mean, it's not set up that way, but might they be the better place? Perhaps they have some more expertise. Judges in the Superior Court come from a variety of backgrounds. Some will have some experience in dealing with mental health issues. Some will have absolutely no background, no history. And it's just really who you get on that particular day, whether they have that history, the understanding, the training in that.
Okay. Charlene, have you ever had a case where your clients does have capacity but found to not have capacity?
That's quite a tricky question. Just because when I approach a file, and the client is asking me to advocate on their behalf, saying that they do have capacity to make either financial or treatment decisions for themselves, then that is my role. My role is to make sure that the process is fair, that he's adequately represented or she is adequately represented, and that the decision is the one that is most suitable for the presentation that is being made before the consent and capacity board.
So do you have to prove anything for your clients?
Never, not before the consent and capacity board. The onus is always on the treating psychiatrist to bring their case, and they have to prove it on a balance of probabilities. And for everyone's understanding, balance of probabilities, I often say it's almost like a 50-50 chance. If it tips a little bit, 51% or even 50.5% towards the psychiatrist, then the consent and capacity board would uphold the psychiatrist's findings. And then my client would be able to appeal the decision if he or she wishes to do so.
Andrew, what's one quick advice you can give to someone who doesn't have the capacity or is being challenged in regards to their capacity?
Well, it's not much I can do for them when they don't have capacity. So my advice is get things done while you do have capacity. If you come to me once you've lost your capacity, I don't have the legal ability to draft documents for you. So while you've got it, do it.
Good advice. That's all the time we have for today's episode of Health 180 with Carrie and Fen. Thank you to my guests for joining us. Thank you to Susie Sher Oshawa, and thank you for joining us. And remember, together we're stronger.